It's finally time. No more sifting through 83 different videos on my channel to figure out how to set up Resident Evil 7 for PC VR. Finally, here is the all-in-one ultimate guide to getting started. Welcome to Stereo3DProductions. I'm not gonna stall any further. Let's get to the meat of the matter and show you how to get this done as quickly as possible. The first thing we want to do before we install REFramework, the framework that can enable PC VR in all the Resident Evil remakes, is revert Resident Evil 7 to its original DirectX 11 version. Something we can only do because players were in outrage after Capcom forced everyone to the unwanted DirectX 12 branch of the game, and something the mod's developers highly recommend doing for this game, even though the mod can be used with the DirectX 12 version by now. Again, yes, you can play this using the DirectX 12 version, but if you do this, you're on your own. There were many game-specific issues fixed in the original RE7 DirectX 11 variants of this mod that may actually not have been fixed in its DirectX 12 counterpart. For example, early on, I'd run into an issue where mechanisms that were supposed to play animations were just not working through REFramework. I would hear a sound when actuating the affected item, but I would not actually see any movement. This was fixed a long time ago, shortly after I encountered it in fact, but I'm not sure if it's also fixed in the DirectX 12 version. And even if this one issue was fixed, I don't know how many others may not have actually carried over. So again, I personally recommend going to DirectX 11 to avoid game-breaking issues, although these instructions can be used to install the mod on either version. So, open your Steam client, right-click on Resident Evil 7 and go to Properties. Then go to the Betas tab, and from there you can select the old DirectX 11 version. Your game should at this point request an update, and once that completes, you'll be back to having the game in its original format. Now while you're at it, right-click Resident Evil 7 again, go Manage, and then click Browse Local Files. This will open your game's root folder, which we're going to need in a moment. With all that done, we're going to take care of the mod itself. Head over to the REFramework Releases tab. There's going to be a link in the description to this page. For those of you who want to stick to DirectX 12, take care to grab the re7.zip file on that page. For those of you who have reverted the game to the DirectX 11 version like I've done, grab the re7_tdb49.zip file. Either way, the extract install process will not differ. Just make sure you get the archive corresponding to your game version. Next, this process is going to seem familiar if you watch my other mod instruction videos. Extract the contents of the archive we just downloaded into a folder of its own, and then copy the contents of this folder into the root folder of your game, which we opened just a moment ago. That's it. This step has effectively converted your RE7 installation into a PC VR game. If ever for some reason you need to update the mod with a version fresher than the one on the releases page, either because you ran into an issue you're hoping is fixed in a later version, or you just want to have the freshest build available, you can click the newer builds link and download the corresponding file from that location instead. And if you've already installed the mod once, just repeat the same process and allow the files to be overwritten when you copy the contents of the mod into the root of your game. Now do keep in mind this mod supports both OpenXR and OpenVR, and while I generally recommend using the OpenVR variant, I will admit OpenVR forces you to use SteamVR. And so if you're using an Oculus kit, the game will simply perform better over OpenXR since you can bypass the middleman that is SteamVR and go right through Oculus runtimes primarily. However, REFramework comes with an in-game menu that allows players to change VR options on the fly, and this menu will not show up in the OpenXR version since it's not supported. You can still access it through the desktop, but that may prove mildly annoying. The other downside of using OpenXR directly through Oculus runtimes is you will lose all the helpful SteamVR controller binding options. For all these reasons, I personally prefer to stick to OpenVR, especially since I use Virtual Desktop as my main interface now, but if you want to give OpenXR a shot, all you have to do is remove the file openvr_api.dll from your game's root. Don't worry, this is a file that came with the mod and isn't a part of the original game, so you can delete it and restore it later by extracting it from the mod archive if you change your mind later on. Do make sure that your Quest Link software is set as the main OpenXR runtime if you're hoping to bypass SteamVR entirely. You'll find that option in Quest Link settings under the General tab. I'm going to throw in an extra important piece of info for this showcase. This game works with the OpenVR FSR mod, and so I'm going to show you how to integrate it into your setup. Keep in mind, this is for those of you who run into performance issues despite running at or below 100% your headset's resolution. If you plan on running this game anywhere above 100% resolution, don't bother with FSR since it's meant for upscaling. If you run into performance issues while you're above 100%, just bring the factor down a little bit and try again. The FSR tool in that case would be kind of a resolution oxymoron. Only do this step if you're running at 100% resolution or lower and need a few extra frames back still. For example, on my RTX 2080 Ti, the game would run great at 90Hz, but going for 120Hz, I needed to make a compromise somewhere since it just fell short by a little bit. I was running at 100% resolution, and so I went for the FSR mod, and sure enough, I gained just enough performance budget to run smoothly at 120Hz. Keep in mind, this is an OpenVR mod, and therefore will only work through the OpenVR mode and SteamVR. The process is, again, the old standard. Download this mod's archive from the link in the description below, then extract this archive into a folder of its own, and then copy-paste those contents into your game's root folder, the same folder we opened earlier when we installed the VR mod. Of course, here there's a catch. This is an openvr_api.dll file, which if you're already using OpenVR will already exist. So you have to accept to overwrite the original file. Don't worry, it will not interfere with the VR mod. That's it, you now have FSR installed on RE7. Next, you can open the file openvr_mod.cfg in the root of your game to change the settings for FSR. There's a lot of options here and I could go on for hours about each one, but I'll only point out the enable parameter, which should be true if you want this mod to run, or false to be disabled. And just as important as the enable setting, render scale, which represents at what percentage the game resolution will render before being upscaled. For example, my setting of 0.84 means the game will render at 84% of what it normally would, and then upscale the image through the FSR filter with enhancements all the way to 100% of the intended resolution. This results in a fairly important performance gain either on low-spec systems or on stronger systems where you're trying to push the envelope like me with the 120Hz. Depending on which case you're dealing with, try render scale values between 0.7 and 0.9 and see what kind of gains you get, and save the file before you launch the game. Keep in mind that if you update REFramework later and overwrite your OpenVR API.dll file while doing so, you'll need to repeat this FSR mod install process again. Since I upgraded to the RTX 4080, I no longer use this mod, as now I can render the game far above 100% resolution without running into performance issues, but I will say this little mod is a game changer for most players, since even on something as strong as an RTX 2080 Ti, you still have something to gain from it. I really recommend checking it out if you're running into any kind of bottleneck with RE7 and VR. This FSR tool is so damn efficient, you may well get decent results out of this game on as little as a GTX 1070 with it. Truly a lifesaver for those of us on older hardware. Now, we're already good to go to launch in VR, so fire up your VR runtimes, either SteamVR, Virtual Desktop if you're using that, or Oculus Link. With your headset ready to go, launch Resident Evil 7. A couple of publisher logos in, and you'll suddenly see the game go from desktop into VR mode. The first thing you might want to check out before you start playing in VR are the graphics options. Depending on your graphics card, you may well want to tweak a few options here. I usually want my games to run at the highest resolution possible. This is always my priority, and it should be yours too when it comes to VR. So if you have an older GPU in the GTX 1070-1080 range, make sure to undershoot most of the options except texture quality. Do make sure that frame rate is set to variable, that VSync is off, and check that rendering method is on normal. The other option, interlace, does not work well at all with VR. This is quite important, but the most important option in all this set is the next one, resolution scaling. Leave this option at 1.0 and do not set it to anything else. I mean it.
But sir, my graphics look so much sharper when I put
wait,
them
my
on
graphics
one.
look hey, shut up! Listen, this option is super inefficient. If you think your graphics look better when you raise this option above 1.0, it means you can increase your game's actual resolution to get the same result with incomparably better performance, all while leaving this value at 1.0. The same goes in reverse. If lowering that value below 1.0 gets you better performance, it means you can lower the game's actual resolution while also leaving this option at 1.0 while getting a much greater performance gain. The problem here is this option is super inefficient and will actually cost you dearly in performance when compared to just increasing or lowering the game's actual resolution. Leave this at 1.0, I'll show you in a moment how to change the game's actual resolution the correct way. If you do use any value other than 1.0 here, then you're basically running with needless overhead one way or another. In addition to that, don't forget that I showed you how to install FSR, which should take care of the scaling. For the other options, I'll leave it up to you to find a balance you like, but just keep in mind that shadows and effects can make a big difference, and compromising on those can help you run at 10 to 20% more resolution, which is a lot more value to the eye in VR than some silly cinematic effects. There is one option I go for that takes away a few frames, but I still prefer it over all the other options. This game's SMAA anti-aliasing is very decent, and it's the only one that's decent. All the other options look subpar, so I don't mind the added demand of SMAA. Also, do turn off the film grain and chromatic aberration, as those two effects will make you think you're having an internal brain hemorrhage. By the way, the game's resolution option has no effect when you're playing in VR with REFramework. If you want to actually change your game's resolution, just use your VR runtimes built-in option to do so. With either a Valve Index or the Quest with Virtual Desktop over SteamVR, you can open the runtimes video options and change the per application resolution multiplier for RE7. This looks a lot like the built-in resolution scale option that RE7 offers itself, except changing the value here will not come with insane overhead. Whether you're looking to upscale, i.e. run at a resolution lower than 1.0, or supersample, run at a resolution higher than your headsets, then do it through here. For Oculus Link or AirLink, even if you're going through SteamVR, you can't change the option at runtime, and the SteamVR setting won't have any effect. In the Quest Link app, before launching the game, find your headset in the Devices tab and click on it. Then click on the resolution settings for that device, and here you'll find your refresh rate and resolution scale options, similar to how SteamVR has them, multiplier and all. The only catch here is changing this will restart the runtimes, so make sure to set it before launching the game. Now, with our graphics settings figured out, our resolution taken care of, it's time to take a look at one last thing, the REFramework menu. First, if you're using OpenVR, you'll be able to access this menu in-game directly. Word of warning, it's janky to the point where I have consistently referred to this thing as my little spawn of Satan. See, you can bring up this menu by simply pointing at your left palm with your right hand, then using your right trigger to bring up the ray and select options. But let me tell you, it will peace out on you really often. I remember the first few times I tried to record footage of this menu, I would end up having to do 11 trillion takes until I got it working smoothly enough for the shot. Often I had to walk to my keyboard and press the insert key to reactivate it, then bring it up in game again. When you open this menu, move gently. Don't click the title bar or the edges of the window, as this may resize it or move it, and be gentle when you scroll, because sometimes the scroll can go full schizo and you run sideways until the content is scrolled completely out of view. The silver lining here is you won't have to use this thing too often. Initially, there are only two things you'll want to toggle. First, and I recommend this with every single Praydog mod, go in the VR options and enable decoupled camera pitch. This is really important for comfort, as if you don't do this, cutscenes will forcibly rotate your head up and down in addition to left and right. In fact, the last I checked, if you do not enable this, you'll have a really weird welcome, seeing the title scene for the first time tilted really awkwardly. This will lead to growing discomfort over various parts of the game, and checking this option will make sure to completely avoid that. Now, it's cool that this mod comes with an IK body model and all, but actually, no, it's not cool. This body model is god-awful trash. The IK flings the torso all over the place. Most of the time, it just feels like you have someone's headless dead body hanging from your chin by a meat hook. It's absolutely jarring, and I highly recommend partly disabling it. In the REFramework menu under RE8, yeah, that is a weird category name, we are in RE7 after all, check the option to hide the upper body. In most cases, this will leave you with the body's arms, which are pretty good and immersive, the legs, which are pretty cool to have, but it will disable the torso that keeps dangling under your chin like a giant dead roadkill. In the Not a Hero DLC, there isn't a way to have only the arms in view, so I just left the body disabled altogether because I had the same problem with the meat hook thing. Now, if you're cool with your configuration so far, you'll only have one reason left to open the REFramework menu. You'll find those two options under the VR category, and as you may already realize, these are really important. In fact, if you ever find yourself in the game's menus or some sort of puzzle UI, wondering why the menu keeps moving away from you or towards you when you hit your direction buttons, this is because you are standing well out of your play center. This is a known issue with the mod and nearly all RE games it supports, and all you have to do if you are getting a lot of this is to reset standing origin right there and then. Keep in mind the difference between these two functions, reset view and reset origins, is recenter view will only reorient your camera center to match where you're looking, while reset standing origin will straight up change your play center to where you are standing. Most of the time you'll only be using reset standing origin. So, with OpenXR, you may notice we don't get this little menu. And as much as I am critical of our little spawn of Satan, I will say it sucks not to have access to it at all. But fortunately, there is a fallback method. When you're playing Resident Evil 7 with REFramework, going through OpenXR instead of OpenVR, if you want to access the REFramework menu, you'll have to pause your VR by taking the headset off, at which point the game window on your desktop will revert to running in 2D. You may already see the REFramework menu open in the window, but if you don't, just hit your insert key to bring it up. Once it's there, you can use your mouse to navigate the whole thing and pick options. With this approach, you can take care of checking enable decoupled camera pitch and messing with other options, but naturally it doesn't work at all for recenter view or reset standing origin, since those have to be hit while you are in position with VR actively running. For centering your view, there is one simple trick. Since the only valid reason for using this mod through OpenXR is to be able to run an Oculus kit without going through Steam VR, I'm going to assume this is exactly what you're doing. And so, if you want to reset standing origin or recenter your view, just hit the Oculus button on your right controller, or the Meta button, and use the built-in reset view function in the Oculus runtimes. This will basically have the exact same effect as REFramework's reset standing origin function. Personally, I went a little further with this. Since the desktop version of the REFramework menu lets me configure keybinds, and since I own a wireless Bluetooth numpad that cost me $20, I mapped a couple of num keys to recenter and reset origin, and then I strapped that little numpad on my belt, at which point I was able to hit the hotkeys with the VR headset over my head. I'm not saying you should buy a wireless Bluetooth numpad to play this game, but goddamn did that thing come in handy when I played the game directly through Oculus runtimes. Now that we got our basics covered, and we finally have a fully functional PC VR version of Resident Evil 7, let's take a look at the two play modes you can use with this game. Room Scale VR, which is the first mode you'll be introduced to and likely will play the entirety of the game with, and the other, more limited yet still very enjoyable, Classic Seated VR mode. When you launch into Resident Evil 7 with REFramework, the VR rig will work just like any normal VR room scale game would. Your controllers are your hands, you point to aim and shoot, you've got stick locomotion and rotation, along with a fairly normal set of additional controls. The only issue here is I just have to let you know what the control bindings are for room scale and motion controls because it looks like nobody else will ever do it. See, the bindings aren't bad in any way, but they are cryptically hidden from the general public somehow. Someone went out of their way to make this information classified and sealed the list tight somewhere in the Pentagon headquarters. Fortunately, after fucking around long enough, I figured out the whole list, so here it is. To cancel out of any menu section, it's left A on Valve Index and left X on Oculus or Quest. For the inventory, it's left B on Valve Index and left Y on Quest. To open the map, the gesture is left hand over shoulder and press left B on Valve Index or left Y on Oculus or Quest. To switch weapon, you hold down your left trigger, and then with the left stick you go up, down, right, or left to make your selection. It's the same on both kits. To confirm a menu action, it's right A on Valve Index and right A on Oculus Quest, same on both. To reload, it's right B on both kits. To aim, right grip button down on both kits. To fire, right trigger. To switch ammo, it's right grip button and left B on Valve Index, right grip button and left Y on Oculus or Quest. To sprint, you press your left stick, and this applies to both kits. And to block, raise your hands in front of you as if you were actually blocking. There's one little annoying thing here for me, and that's opening the game menu. With Oculus, the left system button opens the menu, but if I'm going through Steam VR, it opens Resident Evil 7's menu and Steam VR's dashboard at the same time. I've gotten the habit of just dismissing the Steam VR dashboard when that happens and getting on with what I want to do in the menus. Not a major issue, just inconvenient. With that control set in mind, I think the only thing you won't be able to do without having to walk over to the keyboard or creating some sort of special binding for it is changing map floors, because it looks like we just don't have anything bound as the D-pad. In my case, I life hack this issue with my Bluetooth numpad again, since that thing has the arrow keys right on it and they're easy to hit off my belt without even looking. I frankly didn't use the map in this game often enough to ever require even switching floors. It happened to me only twice, and each time, going to the keyboard really wasn't the end of the world, and that being before I got the wireless numpad, this is all in the past for me. Now, keep in mind, when you do play this, that not only are the room scale controls as solid as a first-party native VR game would have it, actually, this is better than some for those, but it even has a little piece of DLC that will be an absolute treat to any VR player. End of Zoe is absolutely awesome with this mod, because you get to physically beat up the sack of shit creatures from Resident Evil 7. You know those bastards that kept trying to give you a periodic heart attack as you made your way through? Yeah, punch those motherfuckers in the face for doing that. Yeah! Take it from someone who normally despises VR Melee. Like, I still hate it, and it hasn't changed. End of Zoe is the only time where I actually enjoyed one entire VR Melee focused play session from top to bottom. If you're into this kind of VR action, you will absolutely love this piece of DLC, and it will even gaslight you into forgetting you're using a mod. Bottom line for room scale VR is it's solid in this mod and should likely be your primary way to play. But if you know me from this channel, you'll know that I still to this day have a penchant for the 2014 style classic seated VR. And since REFramework started off with this play method before eventually evolving into room scale VR, I'm going to pay it a tribute by showing you how to use it because yes, it's still in there and works pretty well, even serving as a good fallback for the DLC 21, which for some reason does not respond to any motion control inputs. Now, I'll just say it right ahead of time, those of you who don't want to use the mouse and keyboard, you can leave now and go play Resident Evil 7 in full-blown PC VR as much as you want. You've got everything you need to be on your merry way. However, I'm still covering this method because I think having the option to play in a more physically casual setting is always a good alternative. Basically, with this play method, you're still in full virtual reality, but sitting comfortably at your desk, using the same old controls you'd use for any non-virtual reality game. Sure, artificial rotation can be a bit of a challenge for a newcomer, but I would advise getting used to it because seated VR may be one of the most convenient, polyvalent methods of playing any VR game that can support it. So, as I've just described it, this method is without motion controls. Just load into the game of your choice, and once you're ready to play, sit at your desk, put the controllers away, and wait for about 15 to 20 seconds for the seated mode to kick in. I myself like to mess with the keyboard movement keys a bit in order to persuade this mode to kick in. Do make sure the game window is focused on your desktop, by the way. This won't quite work if the game window is in the background. You'll notice that all we now have is standard face gun. The decoupled camera pitch option no longer has an effect in seated VR mode. This has been the case since the inception of motion control support with this mod, and because of the way it now handles the in-game camera rig, it seems the original, fully decoupled control scheme is now completely gone. Don't get me wrong though, face gun, the seated VR control scheme where your aim points exactly where you're staring, is incredibly convenient and a popular standard with seated titles, but in my experience, fully decoupled is simply superior in every way. I know that this mod is more or less into legacy support now, but I'm gonna try my best shot here. Praydog, could we pretty please get the fully decoupled control scheme for seated Resident Evil 7 back? Please, it was simply amazing. I know, I can use an older version of the mod for seated sessions and get the same deal, but that decoupled rig has to carry on somehow. It was a treat. Either way, this control scheme is very good, and I tested it for several hours while making this updated showcase to make sure everything was still sufficiently in place to be used through and through. And yeah, the sessions went so well that I played more of this game than I ever asked for, probably going through 5 more hours of this thing before finally putting it down. So while Phase Gun is just not as compelling, and while it, to my actual surprise, makes the game way harder to play because you can't look one way and shoot the other anymore, I still had a really good time. Not to mention, I actually ran into an issue where the 21 DLC tape doesn't register motion control input for some strange reason, and in order to play that one, the only viable control set is the seated one. In fact, one of the most convenient aspects of this mode is the controls being the same as if you were playing on desktop. No weird remappings or custom bindings, whether you're on gamepad or keyboard, nothing changes and you have access to everything, and with our trustworthy gamer muscle memory, I'm sure you'll be hitting all the correct keys in no time. Like I said, this mode may not be for everyone, but I had to show it to you only because the way it's implemented here is at par with VR games that were outright released with built-in seated VR using the exact same control and tracking scheme. For me, it's a great alternative, and based on the sessions I did just for this very video, I honestly love both methods, and I think they each have their time to shine, depending on which one I feel like going for on a given day. I encourage you all to give this mode a shot because it can really give for extremely long play sessions where you just completely escape and fully lose track of time. I swear, motion controls aren't always required for immersion. I hope you all get to enjoy this amazing game the way it's clearly meant to be played. Yeah, that's right, this game should not go near any desktop monitor. Resident Evil 7, by all appearances, was in good part designed for VR, and it's simply a waste to play it any other way. With what you've seen in the video so far, you have everything you need in order to fully enjoy it with the single best medium available for it, PC VR. The Resident Evil 7 Saga is one of the greatest on Stereo3DProductions, right up there with Fallout 4 VR and Alien Isolation, games that I've taken my sweet ass to finish, have revisited from all sorts of angles, but also have been playing on and off for years, as even after finishing those there's always something more to do, and the VR is so damn immersive that I just become compelled to return several times. Not only is Resident Evil 7 a massive saga here, but it's also unique in its own respect. This may be the only game that I ever really saw progress in terms of VR support in this fashion. Almost every single time I launched this game but one, I was running at settings at or greater than the previous time. I saw this thing go from a borderline low-res mad science experiment all the way to a frickin' visual masterpiece with several increments in between. Having gone through major improvements 3 times over with Vorpex, seeing the introduction of the FOV trainer and the aspect ratio patcher over the years, and then a big step up with REFramework later on, with the Quest 3 upgrade and the transition into virtual desktop full-time, another 3 rounds of major improvements for me. I've seen the bar come up over the years, and right now, this isn't just a great VR horror game. It will run quite well on most hardware. Now it's a frickin' masterpiece, and it should be on everyone's best VR games list, provided of course you're into absolutely terrifying horror. The presentation is great, the acting is great, the atmosphere is perfect. I fucking love the Baker estate in VR, and the gameplay is awesome, an actual break from the typical Resident Evil games, one that I personally very much appreciated. REFramework really opened the gates for this game to finally shine on PC VR, and frankly there is simply no other way to play this game. Don't waste it on a desktop, forget the PSVR edition, just play this thing on a PC with this setup and you will be amazed and you'll thank yourself for not having spoiled this VR wonder. As for me, I'm glad to have finally consolidated all this stuff into one video, because finally you are all gonna have a one-stop place to get your instructions instead of scraping through my channel to connect the dots between 3 different videos to get your setup going. I hope you appreciate, and I definitely hope you're going to have fun with this game. You've been watching Stereo3DProductions and this Resident Evil 7 PC VR showcase, and I shall see you next time. Thanks for watching.